November 11th, 1944, Captain Howard Jarrell and his B-29 Superfortress crew had just finished bombing a steel factory in Manchuria when the No. 2 engine caught fire. They were over Japanese-occupied territory, 500 miles from the nearest American base, with an engine burning and fuel gauges dropping fast. Jarrell had two choices: bail out over enemy territory and spend the war in a Japanese POW camp where survival was unlikely, or turn north, cross into Soviet Russia and hope the Russians would help them. The Soviet Union was America's ally. They were both fighting the Axis. The Russians would help, right? Jarrell pointed the B-29 north and prayed. They crossed into Soviet airspace at 8,000 feet, the burning engine trailing smoke like a banner. Soviet fighters intercepted them immediately, P-39 Airacobras with red stars on the wings, waggling their wings. "Follow us." The Russians led them to a military airfield near Vladivostok. Jarrell landed the damaged B-29, shut down the engines and climbed out, expecting a handshake and a hot meal. Instead, Soviet soldiers surrounded the aircraft with rifles pointed. An officer who spoke broken English said 3 words: "You are arrested." Arrested, they were allies, but the Soviet Union had signed a non-aggression pact with Japan. Officially, Russia wasn't at war with Japan, which meant allowing an American bomber to land, refuel, and leave would violate that treaty. The Soviets couldn't let them go, but they also couldn't send them back to the Japanese. So they did the only thing that made political sense. They interned them. Internment meant prison with better food. Jarrell and his crew spent the next year in a compound near Tashkent, along with dozens of other American aircrews who'd made the same desperate choice. They weren't beaten, they weren't starved, but they weren't free. Letters home were censored. They couldn't leave the compound, and every week Soviet engineers came to examine the B-29, measuring, photographing, taking notes. The B-29 was the most advanced bomber in the world. Pressurized cabin, remote-controlled gun turrets, ranged to strike targets 1,000 miles away. The Soviets didn't have anything close, and now they had one, intact, to study. That B-29, and 2 others that crashed in Russia later that year, became the template for the Soviet Tu-4 bomber, a reverse-engineered copy so exact it even copied the bullet holes in the skin. The Tu-4 would become the Soviet Union's primary nuclear bomber during the early Cold War, capable of reaching American cities. All because Captain Jarrell had to make an impossible choice on November 11th, 1944. But Jarrell and his crew didn't know that. They just wanted to go home. In 1945, with the war ending, the Soviets quietly released the American aircrews, sending them to Iran, then back to the United States via a circuitous route designed to avoid publicity. Jarrell arrived home 9 months after he'd taken off from Guam. He never spoke publicly about what happened. The Army classified the entire incident. For decades, most Americans never knew that US bombers had been interned in Russia, or that those bombers had accidentally given the Soviet Union the technology to threaten America. Jarrell died in 1992, taking most of his story with him. But in recent years, historians have pieced together what happened to the B-29s that landed in Russia. How Soviet engineers copied every rivet, every wire, every innovation. How one desperate emergency landing changed the balance of power in the Cold War. History has a sense of irony. Captain Jarrell was trying to save his crew. Instead, he accidentally gave Stalin the bomber that would threaten the United States for the next 2 decades. If you're fascinated by stories like this, subscribe now. We're digging up the stories that got classified, forgotten, or buried. Comment and tell me, what would you have done? Risked internment in Russia or capture by Japan? There were no good choices in 1944. See you next time.